Now we're turning into English. We are very honored to have Sara Minkara here with us in the opening conference. Sara Minkara is someone I really have very close to my heart. I admire her very much. And let me tell you a little bit about Sara. Sara Minkara led the U.S. foreign policy on disability rights as the second ever U.S. special advisor on international disability rights. She elevated disability policy across sectors such as trade, emerging technologies, climate action, peace, and security. Fluent in Arabic and English and conversational in Spanish, Sara brings a unique perspective as a blind Muslim first-generation American, fostering authentic dialogue and adaptive leadership in more than 70 countries. Known for her ability to build partnerships across government, private sector, and civil society, Sara leverages disability diplomacy to bridge divides and create sustainable solutions that benefit all stakeholders. Through her career, Sara has influenced global disability policy through advocacy at major international forums, such as the G7 Forum, the Associated of Southeast Asian Nations Forum, and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. Sara founded Empowerment Through Integration some years ago, which worked systemically to break down barriers for over 1,000 youth with disabilities across the Middle East and North Africa region. She also pioneered In the Dark methodology, which is a transformative framework that fosters authentic dialogue and changes societal narratives. Sara is young, but her work has been recognized globally, earning awards such as Forbes 30 Under 30, the Clinton Global Initiative, Vital Voices, and roles as sought-after speaker and facilitator. Her experience, knowledge, and skills really contribute in a significant manner to strategic alignment, fostering innovation and equity within organizational frameworks. And that's only a few things that Sara has done. I am very honored to introduce Sara Minkara with us. Thank you, Sara, for accepting this invitation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Christina. It's so good to hear your voice, and it's so good to be with you and everyone else virtually. I should probably change in my bio about the conversational Spanish. I'm realizing my Spanish is not that strong. Anyways, but it's so good to be with everyone here today. And so as I do my remarks, I do want you guys to think about one question as I do my remarks. The first question is, how do we get people who don't care about disability inclusion to care? And how do we get people with disabilities into spaces that they're not usually typically in? Those are the two questions I really want you to think about as I do my remarks. So from the top, there's three main common narratives that I've seen in traveling. In the past 3 years when I was a U.S. Special Advisor, I traveled to 50 countries. And across all these different countries, there were three main common narratives that I saw over and over again. The first narrative is we're called vulnerable population. And I really hate that word. You know, people say, oh, disabled people are vulnerable population. And I always say we're not vulnerable because we're disabled. I'm not vulnerable because I'm blind. We're vulnerable because society, systems, and spaces are not thinking about us, are not accessible to the disability community. And when the society system does not think about us and is not making the system accessible to people with disabilities, then we do become vulnerable. Does that make sense? So when there's emergency plan responses that country has developed and it's not accessible for the disabled community, then we do become vulnerable. So that's number one. Then society says, okay, sure, you want us to think about you. Society will say, well, let me fix you versus fixing the system. I remember I was in a meeting with a country leader, and this person turns to me and he's like, Sara, my dream is for you not to be blind someday. I hope I can find a cure for your blindness. And I turned to him, I was like, my dream is for you to create a world where I, as a blind person, and persons with disability can exist as they are with no barriers. Do you see that distinction? Don't fix me as a person, fix the system. A lot of us see our disability as an identity that we embrace and we're proud of, and some of us might not be embracing our disability identity, maybe because of the narrative that exists, maybe, and a huge part of it is because there's so many barriers that we do face on a daily basis in our lives, whether we're talking about education, infrastructure, technology, etc. But when we remove these barriers, it changes it changes everything in terms of how we see our disability identity. So again, don't fix me, fix the system. Then society says, okay, sure, you want us to fix the system? Special needs, special accommodation, it's costly, it's a burden, it's an add-on. The numerous time I would be talking to a startup company and I ask them, have you made sure that your software that you've developed is inclusive and accessible to the disability lens? And they say, well, not in the beta version, maybe later on. Why later on? Why are we seen as an afterthought? And let's reverse that. To be honest, when we are not included into the system, then we do become a burden later on. When we're not including into the system, sorry, you're losing out up to 7% of the GDP. It's a cost in society. And I also, when people turn to me and say, Sara, you're blind, you have special needs, I turn to the sighted person, I say, if I turn off the lights right now, who has special needs? Why is providing light in spaces not seen as special accommodation for sighted people? Again, it's all about how we frame things. It's all about how we approach, how we design, how design spaces are accessible for all, with the understanding that actually it does benefit all. And people do talk about the curb cut effect, right? Curb cuts that were created for wheelchair users, but everyone benefits from it. But there's so many more examples of the curb cut effects. Why aren't we talking about the fact that text messaging came from the need of the disabled community? Captioning, automatic captioning in our online platforms, and I can go on forever and ever. But again, these three main narratives, you're vulnerable, let me fix you, and you're an add-on and costly and a burden, these three main narratives still exist in our society everywhere. Whether it's subtle ways or whether it's explicit. And these narratives result in policymakers, educators, program designers, either taking these narratives and influencing how they approach things. We're either an invisible population in a lot of spaces, or if we are seen, we're seen through a charity lens, or at best, we're seen through a social protection lens. What do I mean by the social protection lens? Most countries, when I travel, disability is very much pigeonholed in the Ministry of Social Affairs, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Education, and Ministry of Health. And yes, there should be that, the disability should be within those ministries. But when I go and I ask, I would love to meet with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, or AI, or Trade, Investment, Emerging Technology, Energy, Climate. Most of these ministers had, in my 30 years, I've not thought about disability. Wow, that's a huge statement. And this is why we come to a reality where, for instance, when we talk about emergency planning, 86% of local emergency plans are not inclusive of the disabled population. 86%. That's pretty huge. 6.6% of peace treaties in the past many decades have even touched on the disabled voices. 0.5% of microfinance lending goes to the disabled entrepreneurs. 98% of websites, they did a study on 1 million websites, 98% were not accessible. And on. But that comes to a reality that this comes from the fact that these three narratives are influencing how we approach disability inclusion. You know, when we used to travel and our embassies would be organizing our trips and they would be organizing our agenda, for the first agenda that came to us would be, you're going to meet with these four ministries that I mentioned to you: social, labor, education, and health. You'll meet with a disability organization, which is really important. You'll meet with this company that's doing good inclusive employment, and there you go. We would go back and say, actually, we want to meet with the Ministry of AI or digital transformation, or we want to meet with the Ministry of Trade. And that in itself started a conversation even within our embassy. Disability is not just a human rights issue, and it is a human rights issue, but it's an economic issue, it's a political affairs issue, it's a public diplomacy issue, it's a consular issue, it's an issue across all efforts within our diplomacy. So please don't pigeonhole us into one lens. So that in itself really shifted the conversation, but it illustrated to me that there's four main challenges that we see when it comes to disability. The first challenge is we are very much pigeonholed, right, in that social protection lens. Let's take care of you. And I heard this over and over again. Let's take care of the disabled community. Sorry, don't take care of me. Break down barriers so I can exist like anyone else and I can contribute. Do not see me as a charity case. Just break down these barriers. Then the next challenge is seeing how disability is a cross-cutting issue across all ministry within a government and across all department within an institution. How do you create that shared responsibility? And how do you create it in a way that they see the value? That they see the value in bringing the disabled voices into peace-building processes? And that they understand the value that people with disabilities bring to these spaces. Again, not from a charity case and not from an inspiration case, but from a point of we have contributions to bring forward. So creating that shared responsibility. Third, and this is the most frustrating one, is easy technical solution versus a really hard adaptive work. If inclusion was easy, it would have been achieved. But people want to always do technical solutions. I'll give you an example. A lot of countries have done employment quotas, and they say if you need to employ 2% of employees need to be persons with disabilities, and if you don't reach that, then you'll get fined. We were in a country, and there was an employment quota, and what ended up happening is that companies would find the persons with disabilities, put them on payroll, but then tell them not to come into work, because they did not want to deal and they don't see the value of persons with disabilities. They don't want to deal with breaking down barriers. Again, this employment quota was a technical solution to adapt a problem. We need to map out the systemic barriers that we face in order for us to be fully integrated into society. It's hard work, but it is work that benefits everyone in the long run. And that's why it's so important for us when we talk about disability inclusion in the educational system, in the employment sector, in the technological sector. In the long run, it will be a benefit in a multifold way. Now, the fourth challenge is the narrative. And I will say you can have all the policies in the world, but who implements policies? People. And if people in society still see us from a charity and inspiration for narrative, we're never going to be able to fully implement policies in the right way. How do you influence and change the narrative? Media and the entertainment industry. We need to have more difficult conversations. We need to have more effort when it comes to the media and entertainment industry. If you look at the media and entertainment industry when it comes to disability, there's still that charity lens or the inspiration porn lens. We don't see enough stories of normalizing disability in our society in a way that we expect persons with disabilities to be out and about, living their life fully, going to school, having jobs, having family, having kids, etc., etc. And if it happens, society is like, oh my God, that's so amazing. It should be normalized and it should be expected. And media and entertainment has a huge role to play. So how do we really influence narrative? Now, again, in all parts of the world that we went to, from Colombia to Cuba, to Kenya, to Mozambique, to Cambodia, all these different places, every single place have beautiful, best, good, and promising practices. It was really beautiful to see in Chiang Mai, Thailand, there's an association training farmers with disabilities and using technology to be able to do farming. Or in Kenya, they were helping. They had developed a disability entrepreneurship hub with one of their main universities. Or in Cuba, which was really beautiful, they were working on inclusive education from an early stage, and they were integrating and working with parents and family from the get-go because they understood family and parents played a huge role. These are practices we need to keep sharing, elevating, learning from each other, and being able to bend, so we all can, instead of reinventing the wheel, we can build on each other. I do want to end in saying, we as a disability community, we tend to we have these big different conferences, right? That we're a part of the UN Conference of State Parties. There was a Global Disability Summit a few weeks ago, and my question for the disabled community is, how do we bring to these spaces people who don't care, who don't understand, or who want to learn? Because right now in most of these spaces, people that are there agree, and we're just agreeing with each other. And on the other hand, I will say to the disabled community, we need to start targeting spaces that we're not part of. How do we enter spaces like NATO? G7, but across the board. Yes, we had the first ever G7 disability ministerial meeting this past October, but how do we continue building it out and entering other ministerial meetings within G7, G20, APEC, ASEAN, all these different spaces where we need to mainstream disabilities at the table when we're talking about AI policies, when we're talking about trade, when we're talking about investment, climate. We need to be at the table. Right now, there's a disconnect. And that is going to be my ask always. Insert yourself in spaces that we're not in. And when you're in a space, pull in people who are not thinking about us. I will end by saying, there is a phrase in the disability community, nothing about us without us. And I will say that's really important, but I want us to get to a point where we say nothing without the disabled community. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sara, for such a bold and powerful words. Really, I think this is what we were aiming to understand. I have a question for you, and I would like you to share what are your thoughts about what role plays early education in the construction of a more inclusive society and on the understanding of all those points that you have pointed out really well. Could you please tell us more about that?
It's a really good question, and early education plays a huge role. It plays a huge role in a few different layers. It plays a huge role for the student with a disability and getting them to be especially, when we talk about early education and inclusive early education, it impacts the disabled child, impacts, in general, it creates a culture of really understanding what true inclusion means. It helps parents, both parents with and without, that have kids with and without disability. That in itself, we need to get to a point where society embraces disability as an identity, as part of life, as a part of our reality, and where we really see the value across the board. But again, parents play a huge role. One thing for us now that for me is, I don't want to say it's a big worry, it's a big challenge and opportunity, is AI is playing a huge role across the all levels of education. I'm not an expert on education, but for us, AI, we need to really be at these tables and developing AI when it intersects with education and curriculum development and teaching, etc. People are saying that AI will keep taking over more of the education sector. How do we ensure that AI is tailored and it addresses and is accessible for the disabled students? And on the other hand as well, how do we create guardrails to protect persons with disabilities through AI? What do I mean by that? There's something called neuro rights. And how do we ensure that, if AI is integrating with is being used for the neuro, how do you?
So that if the neuro pathways are being reacted with these technologies, that they are safe, first of all, for people with disabilities, because they'll be the first people that will be testing them out, usually, and then to safeguard their thought processes and the information of those thought processes, because that's individual information that belongs to them, but others will have access to that and will have the rights to it. So really making sure that their thoughts and their neural pathways are protected from people taking advantage of them and utilizing them in ways that they didn't intend for that to be used.
Yeah. So that's really important for us to really having more conversations around these topics of neuro rights as well.
Thank you, Sarah. That takes me, I know a little bit of the answer. Maybe you have already mentioned it in your talk, but would you have specific recommendations to schools in that sense? Because so far we know that we have gone through a path, but it's not been easy, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So can you reinforce that on how to make it, to change the narrative, not change the narrative through the media, but change the narrative in the schools?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I look at the education sector across a few different layers. There's the curriculum. There's the curriculum that we bring forward to students. There's the student experience, and then there's the faculty experience and how they actually relay the information on the curriculum development. And this is really important. And we even see this as a huge challenge within the U.S. is how do you bring disability into all types of topics and conversations? So not just disability studies. No, like I would love for a climate justice department to be integrating disability, our economic development department, our trade department, our whatever department, right? How do we ensure disability is part of those curriculum? And we're still far from that. And we need to have that, especially I'm thinking even from my perspective, the public policy schools, but even beyond that. So that's one layer. The second layer is student experience. So the more we break down barriers for students with disabilities, the more than students with disabilities will be able to be fully integrated within universities. And what's really important is for us to do journey mapping for students with disabilities to understand what are their barriers, how do we partner up with them to break down these barriers so they can excel. And that's really important. Third is faculty. They play a huge role. They play a huge role in terms of how they teach, and if they teach in an accessible way, how do we give them the right tools and resources, and how do we also have more faculties with disabilities? So all of that to say is that for me, the main thing, it does in so many ways makes a difference when the leadership of the university says, this is an important value and principle, disability inclusion. I would love for all of my faculty to integrate disability into their curriculum. And then we can always find resources to build the capacity of that. I don't think that's a question on that front. And then for students, the narrative makes a huge difference when you approach it. We're going to partner up with you to understand your barriers so we can break down those barriers instead of approaching it from a compliance perspective. Let me just meet whatever is legally required. I hope that answers the question.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Personally myself, I have been getting more familiar with universal design for learning. Before, the very first person who spoke at the inauguration, Vanessa Valero from the University of Murcia, recognized that is the one very important approach. However, being at some of the meetings in California about universal design for learning, I've learned myself that despite 40 years of the trying to disseminate this approach, it's not even half the schools in the US, at least, that are adopting this perspective. That's where it originated. What can we I don't think we have any records on what's happening in Latin America. What would you think about? What do you think about that? I know that is maybe a little bit repetitive, with some of the things that you have said, but it really, I know the power of universal design for learning, but I'm finding it complicated to understand why, despite all the efforts, it's still not being adopted. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it goes back to, and this is where I do see the link between media entertainment across all of these areas. People still don't see the value in it. They still, and I think this is what's, like you said, I'm still shocked over and over again. I mean, universal design benefits everyone. It's not more costly. It's not whatever, right? Like it's just the common sense, but people still don't integrate it into their teaching. And I think this goes back to, there's other, I think there's other communities that have elevated their voices and their needs in a very powerful way. How can we replicate some of that? But again, what they did is they really, the narrative is, what they pushed out was really strong. And we need more people with disabilities in the media industry and in the entertainment industry, because that does influence across the board right now. And literally, when I was in the State Department, the numerous times that people have said, I've never thought about this before. This is even my own colleagues. And now I'm going to a couple of different education institutions. I'm like, I would love for there to be a disability and diplomacy kind of lens, and people are just not thinking about it. So going back to your universal design, lens, again, it is a shock, but again, people are just either not thinking about it, don't see the value. They think it's an added thing. We need to create more awareness. I don't have, to be honest, I don't have an answer, because I myself, I'm just like, but I do go back and I say to my colleagues from the disability community, we need to start thinking more strategically what spaces we're entering in. And I think that's going to be always a question. For me, when I get invited to different conferences and I have limited number of time to go to certain I will go to the conferences that have never even thought about disability, because those are the spaces that we need to be in. This is where we're going to create more awareness, so people will say, oh my God, this is a huge loss. And I'll give you guys one example. June 2023 was the Ukraine Recovery Conference in London. Okay, I think that was June. Yeah. And this is where all governments were coming together to talk about the recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine. And they were talking about green Ukraine. And before, leading up to that conference, no one was talking about, well, not just green Ukraine, accessible Ukraine. Like, how can you be rebuilding a country while it's not being rebuilt in an accessible way? We made sure our Secretary of State had we integrated accessibility into his remarks, but then the U.S. was the only country. And I remember sitting there and seeing everyone in that room, in that space, and thinking about, how are people not thinking about this? There's more disability being created because of this war. There's going to be a lot of veterans with disabilities. There's already a disabled community from before. Why is this a lens that's being forgotten? And so I'm constantly shocked, and I just don't know. But then it takes us to really push ourselves to be in these spaces to say, hey, accessibility is not just an add-on, a later thought. It's going to be a benefit for everyone and benefit for your economy. So I know that didn't answer your question fully, but I'm in the same boat.
Great, thanks, Sarah. We have also questions that maybe, no, this is a tricky one. You may want to say as much as you want. What is your perspective on terms of inclusion and disability rights in Mexico in particular? Did you have a chance to visit us?
I unfortunately, we were asked a few times, but unfortunately I did not have the chance to go to Mexico, and it's one of my biggest regrets. There's a few countries that I wish I really was able to make it out there. So I wouldn't feel comfortable commenting, but Christina, what would you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes. Yeah, yes. I think that we will have a talk on Wednesday from someone who is more expert telling us about how things are happening. Yeah.
There is there is one professor I came across who's based in Mexico. I forgot what university. ITM. Her name is Dr. Bahari. I don't know if you know her, Christina, but anyways, she's an expert on disability and trade, one of the few in the world. So she's someone that we connected with and learned a lot from when we were, working on trade stuff. That's just one thought, but I know that doesn't answer the country question.
Thank you, Sarah. Someone, Alice, also from Mexico, she would like to know if you can recommend something specifically in literature for English as a second language in teachers in Mexico, so they can improve their teaching practices to students with certain disabilities like THAD and other common conditions. I'm wondering if there is anything like that.
A book
or
that,
literature. These are teachers who are teaching English as a second language.
Honestly,
I don't. Sorry, I'm like this is far from. I'm a generalist, so in terms of literature, nothing comes to mind, to be honest. But I can definitely ask a lot of my friends and come back to you if you're asking for certain literature on this, teaching English as a second language for people with different types of learning disabilities. I can definitely ask.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm just reading questions from the audience. Then there was Matilde that says, in Mexico, television shows are beginning to include protagonists as, with disabilities. However, those stories end with the character recovering, as you mentioned
exactly.
before. And the happily ever after no longer includes disability, right?
Yeah.
So she's asking if this narrative is or trend, narrative trend is common in other countries as well.
Yeah, totally. You see this in, like you said, in soap operas in different parts of the world. It's exactly, a character gets a disability, then recovers at some point or whatever it is. And the narrative, I haven't seen, I know, and Hannah always says British shows have done it the best so far. You need to bring a disabled character in a way that's normalized. It's just part of any it does not even have to be the main character. It's part of the storyline. It's that person's living their life. They're, it's not seen as, oh my God, it's such an amazing thing that they found love, or oh my God, they're waiting to get a treatment. So it is, and this is where we were out in Turkey, because as you know, Turkish soap operas are pretty they're spread across different parts of the world. So when we were out in Turkey, we actually, our embassy organized a roundtable with producers from Turkish soap operas, Netflix, and then also the disabled community. We came together and we talked about what is the current narrative and how do we get producers, directors, and writers and script writers to be thinking about, integrating disability in the right narrative. And the way we left this meeting, I remember them turning to us and said, oh my God, there's so much more, there's so much work to do, and we are committed, but there's so much more we still need to learn. Because their first instinct was to create this main character and there's this inspiration poor narrative, and we were pushing back and saying, no, we just want to be seen like anyone else. So there's still, so it is a common thing across the world.
Thank you, Sarah. We are we're getting short of time. I'm sorry.
So Hannah looked up, so MIUSA, Mobility International USA, MIUSA
might have some resources for English as a second language for students with disabilities.
Did you hear that?
Okay, yes, great. Thank you, Hannah.
You're welcome.
I just have two more questions, and maybe one can go with the other. Well, one of them posed, what message would you give to youth with disabilities? And then the last one, if you can share something about your methodology, the Interact methodology, and how it helps. And those will be the last comments.
So on the youth one, just generally, how do we, what's the question on the youth with disabilities?
What message would you give to youth
any
with
advice?
disability?
Okay, any message, yes. So I would say, to be honest, I think there's a couple of things. One is youth with disabilities. My ask and my advice is there's a lot of different youth efforts happening all over the world. For instance, COP30, those climate conferences that happen every year. This year it's going to be in Brazil. They have youth delegations going to Brazil, each country sending a youth delegations. How do we get youth with disabilities part of these delegations, for instance? There's efforts around youth, peace, and security that the UN it's been focusing a lot on, and other security spaces. How do we get youth with disabilities to be part of these spaces? Also, the World Bank that's one of their main focus for the future, is how do you get youth to be part of the upskilling of our future job sectors, because it's estimated by 2030, and 80% of the jobs are going to be new sectors, right? So again, how do we get youth with disabilities to be part of that upskilling and that change, especially in our job sector spaces? So my advice for any of us as youth with disabilities, try to enter these spaces, try to apply to these different fellowships out there for youth, and yeah, your voice is really important. The In the Dark methodology is a methodology that I developed. It has nothing to do with simulation of blindness, but what it is that when you are put in a constrained space, you cannot see each other, you cannot see body language, facial expressions. We also tell people you cannot say your name, where you're from, work, and educational background, because those are the 4 things we tend to anchor ourselves in. When you put into that kind of setting, people become more open and more authentic and more willing to share their true perspective. And it's really powerful. So we use that as a tool for organizations, where we create spaces for difficult conversations, where we create spaces for to drive more innovation, and where we create spaces where we're developing policies and programs that brings people's true perspective forward. So that's something that we're focusing on right now.
Wonderful, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Of course.
We are like at the end of this wonderful conversation with you. Thank you very, very much. It has been very enlightening to hear you as always, and I really thank you for your time. We, as part of the organizing committee, would like to thank you for accepting this conversation.
Thank you, Christina. It's so good to hear your voice, and thank you, everyone. It's so good to be with you virtually. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah. Muchas gracias a todos por las preguntas y por la participación en esta conversación con Sara Minkara.